A purist might say that you should never add colour to engraved glass, but sometimes it can be just the very thing to lift your engraving. So I had originally planned to talk about 7 different ways of adding colour to your engraving, but when I started editing the video it was just far too long, so I'm going to have to make this a 2-part video. In this first part I will look at using glass paint and using Rubin buff. In part 2 that will follow shortly, I will have a look at using marker pens and acrylic paints and gold foil and gold leaf gilding. So if you're interested in seeing that, then please subscribe. I release videos every now and again, so if this is of any interest to you, then please hit the subscribe button, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this video. Hello everybody. Today I'm going to go through a number of the ways I know of to add colour onto engraved glass. These are probably not the only ways to add colour onto engraved glass, but they're the ones I know about. In preparation for that, what I've done is I have put some engraving onto a little piece of glass here, nothing fancy, just something we can use to show how these different methods of adding colour look when they're applied to the engraving. Now the things I've looked out to show you are, I have some glass paint. This is a nice dark blue colour. I have some Rubin buff. Many of you may have used that already. I've got a gold and a silver, but it does come in different colours. I have some acrylic paints and a Sharpie marker. I've got a couple of Sharpie markers. We'll try those out and see how they look. Metal foil. This is a gold coloured metal foil. And I also have some actual, this is 23 karat gold leaf. So we'll try these out and we'll try and see how they look on different parts of the engraving. I've put a little letter, I've put a heart shape here, and I've just got a shape, a rectangular shape, which I'm going to put a bit of shading on so that you can see how the colours look when they're applied over shading. Now the reason this bit has not been engraved yet is that for the glass paint, I'll show you 2 different ways of doing it. Applying it to engraving and applying it to the glass and then engraving through it. So I'll have to do those first. I'm going to start with this Pebeo Vitrea 160 glass paint. This stuff does claim to be waterproof once you bake it. You have to bake it in the oven at 160 degrees, which is about 325 degrees Fahrenheit, but 160 degrees centigrade. And it claims that once you do that, it is waterproof. I don't think it would take a lot of scrubbing at, but if you were to wash it carefully by hand, I imagine it would probably work quite well. So this is a nice blue colour. Now this stuff is a water-based paint, so you can wash your brushes in water. You can also thin it a little with water, but not too much. If you want to thin it a lot, I think there's a special medium that you can mix it with, but you can add a little water to it. But what I'm going to do is just take a little bit and thin it slightly with a little bit of water, just to help me with this, with getting it onto the glass smoothly. And the paint is quite thick, but that little bit of water just helps to thin it down a little. I'm going to colour this area with the paint, let that dry, bake it in, and then engrave through it. This bit I will paint, and then we'll see how those look when we're finished. I have cleaned this bit of glass very, very thoroughly with a little bit of acetone and then polished it up carefully, because any bits of dust or dirt or oil from your fingers will stop the paint sticking properly to the glass and may cause it to flake later when we're engraving. Now it might flake anyway, but at least you'll see how it comes out and you'll know whether it will work for you in your own engraving. So I'm going to apply this quite gently. I have always found that whatever I do, I end up with brush marks with this. I believe it might be possible to, if you thin it properly, apply it with a spray. But I have never tried it. But thinning it slightly does help because it means the paint can spread out a little and take away some of the brush marks. I am told as well that once it's dry and baked, you can add another layer on top if you want to make it a little bit more dense. And again, that would probably help to take away any brush marks or texturing. However, we'll leave that there to dry. That should be enough to let us get on with. And whilst that's drying, I've also got a very little brush here. And I'm going to put the same paint over these other areas that I have already engraved. And although I'm being quite careful here, any that does come out over the top of the engraving I can clean off quite easily at this stage, and even later on I could scrape it off with a plastic card or something like that, something that won't scratch the glass. So some care is required, but it's not absolutely critical. I'll put some in this bit. Now this bit, you may see, has some shading at this end and that graduated to no shading at the other end, so that should help us to see how the glass paint looks over shaded areas of engraving. That's my dog having a drink of water that you can hear in the background probably. See, now I've gone over the edge of the engraving there, but that won't matter. I will sort that out. Now because this is quite a big area, I'm going to go back to the bigger brush to just smooth that out. And that just leaves me with a little letter E to do, which is obviously the fiddliest bit. I should have done that first, shouldn't I? I'll pop some of this in here and then clean off any excess if we need to. Now this has been drying for a few hours, so what I'm going to do is just clear up around the edges, make sure I haven't got any bits of paint where I don't want them to be. It's just an old store card. Works quite well for this job. You could also get a cotton bud with a little water if you wanted, because it's not been baked yet, remember, so it's not waterproof yet. When you're baking this paint, it doesn't give off any fumes, so you can use your normal oven. Just put it into the oven cold and then set it to about 160 degrees centigrade, which is, I think, 325 degrees Fahrenheit. And once it comes up to temperature, then leave it for 40 to 45 minutes to bake. Once it is all baked, I just turn off the oven, allow it to cool down a bit inside the oven, and then take it out, and I'm ready to start engraving the glass. I'm engraving over this blue painted area just as I did for the other bits of the glass. and then moving on and adding a little shading to it so we can see how that looks against the blue painted background. That's all of the engraving I needed to do finished, so let's start having a look at some of the other methods of adding colour to the engraving. We'll start, I think, by looking at Rubin buff. So this is Rubin buff. It is available in a variety of colours. I have silver and gold here, but you can get reds, greens, although I think it's probably easiest to find them online. There are a number of ways you can apply this. You can put it on with a brush or with a cotton wool bud, like a Q-tip, but I'm going to be a bit lazy and just apply it using my finger. Oops, there's a little bit come out there. I'm going to get a very pretty coloured finger when we're finished, but let's do it anyway. And to apply it, just work it into the engraving. Try to get into any corners or any difficult to reach bits. That's the gold. Let's try the silver. I'll put some silver onto the little heart. I'll just put a little bit onto here. Now, as you can see, I've not been very fussy about putting that on there. I'm not worried too much if it goes over the edges. If you were more fussy about that, you would need to use a brush. Also, if you use a brush, you won't end up with pretty metallic fingers. You can leave it to set up a little bit before trying to remove the excess if you like, and that might make it a bit easier, but actually it comes off fairly easily. I've just got a bit of paper towel. Just go around the edges, bringing that off a little bit. The other thing you can do with a bit of an old plastic card, I'm just going to wrap a little bit of paper around that, and I can then go over the top of this a bit more easily without worrying about going down into the engraving and taking out some of the colour that I want to stay there. You could get a bit of cotton wool or another cotton wool bud and use a little bit of a solvent like acetone, something like that. But generally it's just a case of removing the excess that you don't want. Once it's started to set up, you can give it a little buff. It is called Rubin buff after all. Same on the silver bit. Same on the silver bit. Rub down. There we go. So that's Rubin buff. It's quite simple to apply and it's quite readily available, and we'll have a little look at all of these examples at the end to see how they've come out and which one might work best for you. Right, that's it all cleaned up. So let's have a look at each of these in turn to see how they've come out. First of all, we have the glass paint painted into the engraving. That gives a reasonably good finish. It's still fairly translucent. I can still see a lot of light passing through there. So that might be helpful for you if you're wanting something on a vase or a drinking glass or something like that. The colour is reasonably dense, more so on a little heart where I put a second coat onto it. I would say that where I've applied it on the shaded area, you can no longer see that there's any shading on there. If you're going to use this type of glass paint, I wouldn't put a lot of time and effort into getting any shading into your glass, because the glass paint just covers it all up completely. You can look at this glass paint from either side and it looks quite similar. You can still see some of the texturing from the tool marks in the square area, and that may or may not be useful to you depending on the design that you're engraving. The second area I did was painted on the glass paint and then engraved through it. Now that has come out quite nicely. Because the engraving is against a very dark blue background here, the engraving pops out quite a lot. I didn't engrave the section at the bottom to give us some way of comparing. And if you look at the two of these, certainly the engraving on the blue background pops out as much whiter and brighter looking. The engraving is obviously just engraving, so therefore you can still see the shaded and non-shaded areas in the rectangle at the bottom. And the look from the other side, looking through it from the unengraved side, is very similar to the view from the engraved side. Because of the nature of the glass paint, you can still see the lines where the paintbrush has applied it. There may be better ways of applying that, which mean that you don't get that texture, or alternatively, you could use that texture as part of the design. The third option we looked at was using Rubin buff with the gold and the silver. This is probably one of the easier ones to apply, although you do tend to end up with metallic fingers unless you use a paintbrush or a cotton wool pad or something like that. The silver on the heart, for example, doesn't let through a lot of light. It's not very translucent. I can't see my finger through it, so it's really quite opaque. The same is true of the letter. Now, interestingly, the rectangle at the bottom, I had a shaded area on this side and a light area on this side. When you apply the Rubin buff, it sticks better to the coarser texture, which means, bizarrely, although there is gold across the whole of that rectangle, it's actually darker on the side that was lighter. So where I've smoothed the glass to give the shading, the Rubin buff doesn't stick so well. It is more translucent. I can just about see my finger through that, so therefore it looks a little bit lighter, which is maybe not what you'd expect. Looking at it from the other side, it looks very similar. Again, the silver for the heart is really quite opaque. And again, the side that was originally shaded is actually lighter than the other side because the Rubin buff has stuck better on the bit that hadn't been smoothed. And I honestly think that's enough to squeeze into this one video. In part 2, I will go over the other ways I know of to colour the glass, and that'll be ready very shortly. If you would like to see that, then consider clicking the subscribe and the notify buttons, but in any case, I hope you found this helpful. Enjoy your engraving.